I'd like to thank Ryan and Christine for putting on a great event, all of you for coming out. I'm excited to speak on podcasting today. There's a lot of exciting things going on in the space right now. And I think one of the most important things for good marketing that has stood the test of time is to go where your audience is already spending time and add value to them. And as we all know, people are spending a ton of time on this device right here. I think it's about 5 hours a day right now. Whether you like that or not, that's just the reality of our world today. So the companies that are winning here in 2019 are going to be winning. But we have this device right here, the smart speaker, which is actually growing faster right now than these did back in 2008, 2009. So it presents a huge opportunity for companies that are going to take advantage of this medium. I think it's very comparable to the state of kind of where social media was back in 2008, 2009, 2010. So a lot of what I'll be diving into today is how to win on this device and also using podcasting as a content anchor to win on this device as well and create good marketing for your company so you all can grow your business. We can go to the next slide. John, can you guys hear me fine back there? All right, sounds good. Just quick background on myself. Grew up in Madison, went to school here in the area, started my company GGMM shortly after that. How that's relevant to today is we started our own podcast back in 2016, the GoGedders, which I think some of you are familiar with that show. We saw what it did for our business, and it enabled us to launch a podcast marketing service in 2018, just last year. And as Ryan was saying, we've got to work with brands like Thrivent and Marquette and Colliers and Komatsu on audio content. And yeah, that's pretty much all you need to know about me in regards to today's presentation. So as far as an agenda of what I'll be going over today, I'm going to touch on how we started and grew our podcast. I think that's relevant to anyone who's looking to start or grow their show. Just the current state of audio and podcasting, how to monetize a podcast. We get asked this a lot by companies. Oh, podcasting seems like a really cool idea. It's hot, it's sexy, it's trending right now, but how is it actually going to bring in money? If you're spending time and resources investing in something, you'd like a return on that. So I'll be going over that, and then I'll spend a decent chunk of time on how to launch and create a successful podcast and use it as really a content engine for your company. So how we started and grew the GoGedders. Keep moving. So where the podcast is at today, then I'll backtrack to how it got started. We cover Milwaukee-based topics, anything from is the streetcar worth it, covering the Sherman Phoenix, to one-on-one interviews with business leaders, athletes, entrepreneurs. It generates about 8,000 downloads a month. So this is not a iTunes chart-topping podcast. It's in the top 20% or so, but even with that, it's done a lot for our business, and I think that's relevant today because some of that is very difficult to do, but it's not too difficult to start something and have it move the needle for your company. We've generated probably somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million video views with social content from the podcast, and we've done 80 episodes to date. All right, so how the show almost started. Back in 2012, I started GoGeddit. We were actually a daily deal platform at the time. I started it going door to door, doing sales. A couple of you knew me back then. And at the time, I was meeting all these business leaders in Milwaukee who had great stories and wanted to highlight them. So I had this vision of starting this show on video on YouTube, not as a podcast at that point in time. And one episode got created. Adam von Rothfelder over there. It's still on YouTube today. And then we had 5 others, and our hard drive crashed. And I think it was like $1,000 to fix it, and it might not work. And then we pivoted the business at the same time, so those never saw the light of day, pivoted into a marketing agency. And I put this idea on the back burner for the next 4 years or so. And then we actually launched it in 2016. So similar concept, highlighting community leaders, athletes, entrepreneurs. We really started it off with a lot of one-on-one interviews that shifted more into topic-based now, which I'll get into why we've done that. It received immediate attention after launch. We were doing a lot of things wrong at that point in time, but it was different and it was unique in the area, and usually that's a good thing if you're standing out in the marketplace. And then in that first season, we had 37 episodes highlighting 44 leaders, a couple 100,000 social media views, about 15,000 downloads. And it brought in, 6 figures for our business, which was a good chunk of revenue at the time, still a good chunk of revenue, just based on relationships we built and guests we had on who came back and needed a website or social media help and our other services, and just people who found out about our brand through the podcast. And I'll touch on that in more depth on how to monetize. And we secured a media partnership with OnMilwaukee, which we still have that relationship with them. We're actually producing some shows for them now because the content we were creating aligned with the content that they put out on their site. So then something happened. I hired the guy on the left, Gabe, who's our audio engineer, who actually knows quite a bit about audio. And at the time, we were recording this on a $60 Amazon mic in a wide open space, and the audio quality wasn't the best. And he basically came in and told me everything we were doing was complete shit. And if we he said it nicer than that and a little longer winded, but that was the premise of his message, and that if we wanted to take this seriously, we really needed to upgrade equipment and get a better recording space and move from there. And that was the old setup. That was the last episode we recorded. Kind of looks like a throwback to the 70s compared to our current studio. You can go to the next slide. Anyway, that kind of brings me to one of my favorite business quotes, which is, it's good to be better, but it's better to be different. It's good to be better, but it's better to be different. And I look back, and a lot of what we were doing was pretty bad. The audio quality was not good. We were shooting these podcast videos off a single camcorder. There was nothing special about them, but it was unique content in the city of Milwaukee, and no one else was doing it at the time, and that's a big reason why it took off. And I think about a lot of the companies you guys work for and a lot of the industries you're in, and still no one's really doing this yet. And even though there's quite a few podcasts out there, I think it's 750,000 to 1 million at this point. Still not a lot in Milwaukee, still not a lot in your industry, and I think now is still a very good time to get in the game and stand out, especially in a lot of the B2B traditional industries. You can keep going. So today, I said some of this in the intro, but we're up to 80 episodes now, mostly local leaders, some national people as well. It's led to a lot of exposure for our company, a lot of live podcasts at conferences. We've hosted some of our own events. We actually will be hosting a podcast festival November 14th, if you guys want to mark your calendars as part of Startup Week. Hasn't been announced yet, but I'll have Christine send out an email to you guys. And then it enabled us to launch a podcast marketing service, and that's what our studio looks like now, which is a little more legitimate than our last place. And then these are the shows that we've had a hand in producing. Colliers, they do a great job on Milwaukee Forward. Innovators on Tap just launched for Marquette. Trek's Better with Bikes. On Milwaukee, we do a couple shows. Religion of Sports, they're out of LA. They did an episode in Milwaukee and reached out to us, which was cool, so we got to work with them. And then the Fall Experiment, which is coming up, it's a art tech music festival on October 4th. We're gonna record the top 10 talks at that festival and turn that into a podcast and kind of batch release it Netflix style, which I'll get into as well. All right, so now I'll go over the state of audio and where things are at right now. So just some stats. So over half of searches are going to be voice by next year, mainly due to these things. 73 million Americans listen to podcasts. Podcasting has not experienced hockey stick growth. It's not what Snapchat was. It's not what TikTok is now. It's not what Facebook was, where, it comes out of nowhere and just shoots off. It's been around for a while. It just kind of hit that tipping point where it's receiving a lot of attention at this point in time. But I think that slower growth can prove that this is not a fad. It's here to stay, and I think it'll just stay on that trajectory. And then one big thing is, if someone listens to an episode, they consume 85% of an episode. So for the marketing people in here, the average view time on a Facebook video is 4%. And I love Facebook video. We do a lot of Facebook video for our clients. It can work great. It can work great in ads. Big fan of that. But if I put out a 20-minute episode and I'm in your ears for 17 minutes, that's a very powerful way. It's a very intimate way to build a relationship with your customers. And a lot of people just aren't taking advantage of that yet. So just stepping back to the origins, again, this is not anything new. There was audio blogging back in the 1980s. iTunes picked up podcasting in 2005, which is hard to believe that was 14 years ago right now. And again, you can kind of just see the steady growth at the beginning and then just the 20% incline. So again, not hockey stick growth, just good, steady growth on the platform. And again, a lot of this is because people are addicted to speed and convenience. And you think about the content that you guys put out, that your companies put out, and written word and video, they require my full attention at all times to consume that content, to fully consume that content. Audio does not require your full attention. It's a passive medium. And as busy as we are right now, that's very important. So you can listen to a podcast and fully engage and consume with that content when you're doing any of those activities up there. I'm not sure, mopping or welding, but working out, walking your dog, riding a bike. I didn't pick the graphics. They do look pretty good, but we'll go to the next slide. All right, further evidence that we crave convenience. So these things have gone from 7% of households in 2016 to 75% of households in 2020, and that's kind of where it gets back to, hey, these things are growing right now faster than these used to. And the big difference is me saying, hey, Google, how long does it take me to get to Madison, and it just spitting it out, opposed to me typing in the passcode to my phone, finding the Waze app, waiting for that to load up, typing it in, calculating, hour 16. So saved me about 15 seconds if I talk to this. And as lazy as we are as human beings, and as much as we procrastinate, for some reason we really care about those 15 seconds. Just psychologically, the number one job of our brain is to conserve energy. It's just how we're hardwired, and these play right into that psychologically. So I think that's why this trend is so powerful right now. I think we'll be seeing a lot more integration into our houses, into our cars. I think everything will be smart in the next, 3 to 5 to 10 years, and that's a big reason why. Demographics are really all across the board. So when we meet with clients, they're asking, is our C-suite audience on there? Is millennials on there? And the answer to all those questions is pretty much yes. It's not everyone. It's not the market share that smartphones have or that social media has right now. But as you can see, 35 to 54-year-olds, 36%, 18 to 34, 34%, 55 and older, 20%. So, and then you look at these graphs over here, and it's just, again, kind of like the platform itself. It's just inclining steadily, and I think it'll continue to do so. So it is likely wherever your audience is, there's key stakeholders and members of that who are consuming podcasting content at this point in time. And this happened this year. This was a big acquisition. So Spotify acquired Gimlet Media, which is a podcast production company. They produced a number of really successful shows, including Startup. It was a former NPR guy who started that company and sold it for hundreds of millions of dollars. And then they acquired a company called Anchor, which is a podcasting app. So if Spotify, how many of you guys use Spotify in here? Almost everyone. So if Spotify's putting $500 million into podcasts this year alone, they're pretty much waging war with Apple and Google and trying to win this game. And whichever one of those three companies wins, or if someone emerges out of nowhere, which could happen, and create a platform in the next few years, whoever wins that's going to make a lot of money. But the fact that a company like Spotify is throwing down $500 million on this in a year alone is pretty powerful. And then I'm going to touch on this in marketing quite a bit. And we were just talking about this. Podcasting is a lot more than audio. A lot of YouTube creators and YouTube stars are turning their channels into podcast networks, in a sense. One of the big reasons our show took off initially was not because of the podcasting, it was because of all the video content that we created out of the podcast. So anyone in here listen to Joe Rogan at all? So Joe Rogan has one of the most successful podcasts. His episodes are about 2 hours long. They're very long. I don't listen to Joe Rogan's podcast on audio. I listen to it on YouTube because he chops up, 5, 10, 8 to 12 minute clips, puts them on YouTube, and the guy gets 1 million views a day on YouTube alone. And there's several people doing that right now. So I want everyone in here to think of, hey, podcasting can be a big, long form anchor of my marketing strategy, but it's not an end-all be-all. It can be a great way to create additional video content, written content, and just distribute that across several platforms. And I would like to say, yes.
Written content, can you give an example how that would work?
Yeah, so the podcast we do for Trek, for example, we'll do their audio content. We'll put out a full-length video on YouTube of the interview. We'll chop up 3 social media videos for LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, and then we'll do a full-length blog entry for the website, embed the audio content and the video content on that. So just, again, like I said at the beginning, you want to go where people are already spending time and where you can add value to them. And written content is not dead. It's not going anywhere. Either is video content. So if we can use this podcasting platform and then hit people everywhere, because Tim over here might consume content different than John consumes content back there, and I want to be touching my entire target audience, and this is a good way to do that. Oh, we'll stay here. So another thing I want to say is, some people are like, oh, well, there's 1 million podcasts out there right now. There's so much out there. How am I going to stand out? I would like to say there is close to 1 million active podcasts out there, but there's 400 million active blogs and YouTube channels out there. I would rather be in the pool with one person than 400 people competing for attention. So it's definitely not too late to get in the game. And I think every company is going to be doing stuff on audio, in 2, 3, 5 years. But again, like I said, I think if you win now, I think it's going to be like winning on social media in 2008, 2009. Social media is still really valuable now, but if you were an early mover on Instagram or Facebook or any of these platforms, you got a big bump at the beginning. Okay, how to actually make money. What everyone should be interested in. I don't generally like slides with a lot of text, but I thought there was some good stats that I wanted to remember on this one and make sure I got them right. So first we have U.S. podcast ad revenue grew by 53% in 2018. That's a very large number, but it is tougher than you think to make money off of podcast ads. So CPMs, for those of you who aren't in media buying or don't know what a CPM is, it's basically what you're paying to get 1,000 impressions, whether it's a Facebook ad or a banner ad or a podcast. So podcast advertising, the average is $33 per 1,000 downloads is what you can bring in as a podcaster. If you have a niche audience, you could probably get 50, maybe 100, but $33 is the average. If you get 136 downloads, meaning you're in the top half of podcasts, you don't make anything. You make $3 maybe. Not very good ROI. 1,100 downloads, you're in the top 20%, but you're still not making much money. That's where our show's around. It's around 1,100 downloads an episode. The good episodes will get there. 7,700, you're in the top 5%. If you put 3 ads in, which you can do pretty comfortably, you could make $760. If you do an episode weekly, you can make an extra $3,000 a month. Still a lot of work for $3,000. Some people make a ton of money, but they're pretty much in the 1% of podcasts with 50,000 downloads. So if you're starting a podcast because you want to make money off of podcast ads, choose a different business model. There are much better and easier ways to do that. Don't do that. Next slide. This is how you can make money, and this is how I make money. It's a fire emoji tool to build your own business. So you can use it to promote your own products, because people who are listening to your show are probably your warmest audience. They're probably in your network, your customers. They're probably interested in your brand. And I'm hoping transactions for your products, especially we got some bankers, some insurance people. I know Kessler sells rings for more than $33. Your price per transaction is a lot higher than $33. So this is how we've made a lot of money, because a transaction for our company, a new client, can be worth anywhere from, a few grand to well over $100,000 if it's a big client. And we've gotten several clients that were guests of the podcast or found out about us through the podcast and wanted to launch their own show. So that's how we've monetized it. It's a crack sales, networking, and influencer marketing play. It's really easy to get people on your podcast. You're pretty much saying, hey, do you want to come on? I'd love to tell your story, create a bunch of content about you, and make you look like a hero. Not a lot of people are going to say no to that opportunity. So it's a really good way. And I think the number one rule in networking in general is to add value and make other people's lives better. And having them on your show is a good way to do that. And then typically they share that content. Your brand's name's all over that content. You tap into their following. It's just a really good networking, influencer marketing play. And I put a couple pictures of Colliers on here, who's one of our clients. And they've had just a ton of really good content, really good community leaders. And that show doesn't get a ton of views. It might get, a couple hundred views an episode, but everyone in the local real estate industry is listening to it. They've got the key players in Milwaukee listening to it. And it's been a great way to build relationships. And I guarantee they've gotten really good ROI on that podcast to date, similar to how we have. Whereas if you went the ad route and just depended on that, that's tough to do. And it's a great branding exposure play too, if you create the right content and get that out there, and can open a lot more doors. We'll keep going, but if anyone has questions at the end on that, I'll be happy to take them. All right, so how you can create a successful podcast. Go, you're good. Really the process that we go through, first phase is ideation, the second phase is development and launch, and the third phase is ongoing content machine. So ideation, creating a show that matters. The last thing that any of you want to do is put a bunch of time, resources, energy into creating a show and having it fall flat. So this can be done very lightly and efficiently, but just doing some research. Do your competitors create any audio content? What kind of written content does your audience engage with? What kind of questions do your customers have when they come to you? That can all give you ideas. And then stakeholder research, getting them involved. We do this for all the clients that we start a show for, and this does not take too much energy. You can create a survey monkey that's 5 questions long. Ask, do you listen to podcasts? What podcasts do you listen to? If we created content, rate A, B, C, or D. What would you like to hear? Shoot it off to your email list. You may get 20 responses, you may get 500 responses, but I guarantee you'll see some common threads with that on what kind of content people are going to want to hear from you. And then you can just go down that route. Marketing plan alignment. You really don't want a podcast to be just a standalone entity to your marketing. You want it to complement a lot of the initiatives you currently have going on. You guys may be telling great stories through your company like Trek. We work with them. They have great video content. They have great stories in their quarterly catalogs and brand books. And we just came up with hey, your company can tell great stories in the cycling industry no one can get anywhere else. Let's just turn these into audio content, and that was the premise of their show. And then Sonic Mood Board, it'll be really interesting how this evolves, but we create sounds for companies as well. So we think what your company sounds like may be as important as what it looks like in the next 5 years, just because these things are rising so much. You can keep going. Development and launch. You can go to the next slide. So use this as a medium to tell stories your audience can't get elsewhere and to create great content. One of the frameworks that we like using, whether it's a podcast or a video or an email newsletter, is StoryBrand's framework. Is anyone familiar with them? No? They're a company out of Nashville. They pretty much broke down how every Hollywood movie script works and really simplified it into a platform where, I'll just break it down quick. So most movies you're going to watch, they start with a hero or a main character that wants to achieve something. They always run into a problem, a catastrophe, a drama. There's something right at the beginning to hook the viewer. Then they usually find a guide. This can be like Luke Skywalker and Yoda. Could be Happy Gilmore and Chubbs, if anyone likes that movie from back in the day. The guide gives them a plan, calls them to action, and this can result in success or failure. And it usually kind of yo-yos throughout the movie, whether that character is going to achieve success or failure. So it's not completely linear. It moves off that a little. They have a great workshop in Nashville. It's 2 days, but if you don't want to go down there for 2 days and pay $3,000 to take it, there's a great book on Amazon for $15 that can probably arrive tomorrow. I highly recommend that. But so in some of our podcasts, we make the guest the hero. Trek did an interesting one, which is what the YouTube clip is from a woman who started an organization called Black Girls Do Bike, and her journey of what it's like being a minority, a black woman starting an organization in an industry where there's a lot of middle-aged white dudes wearing tight clothing, and her perspective. It was very interesting of how she started that and how she got that off the ground. The Sherman Phoenix is one from an episode we did the Go-Gedders on, and we kind of framed it in that story of how we went back. There was a tenant and the main developer. We went back to the Sherman Park riots and how this entrepreneurial development came out of that problem and that tragedy that happened. So I'd keep this in mind. Obviously, if you're creating thought leader content, you're not going to follow this, but any storytelling form, I highly recommend following this framework. And then just additional tips on content creation. So like I said with the Trek example, what good current marketing initiatives are you guys already doing that could also be good audio content? It doesn't have to be thought leader content. A lot of your companies do a lot for the community, and in Milwaukee, could you create stories with some nonprofit leaders and your involvement there? There's a lot of interesting things that you could do, whether you're a bank, a financial institution, even a manufacturing company interviewing your customers on their stories. A lot that can be done. So content themes have performed better for us than one-on-one interviews. And I think a lot of that has to do with the story. We've had some big names on our podcast, but the shows that have performed the best have been the streetcar debate. We did an episode, Young, Active, and Sober, in a city that revolves around drinking, with 2 millennials. One had stopped drinking for a year, one had stopped drinking for 3 years. And it's good because I think everyone can relate to that, whether they're going to a networking event that night and they don't want to drink because they have something big the next morning, or they're trying to lose weight and stop drinking for a few weeks. It's hard not to drink in this city and be in the business community. I could drink 7 nights a week if I needed to. I don't, but a lot of people were interested in that. So themes are good. And then just news jacking what's hot. And you guys know this if you're in PR. You want to get the best stories. So even taking something that's really hot in the news, like what we did with the streetcar debate episode when it came out, and just creating something unique around that and giving perspective on that. Okay, so now, yes?
Milwaukee Ballet did a really good job when a national personality said that ballet is for women or whatnot. They said they were encouraging boys to take their ballet classes. So they newsjacked, I guess.
Yes, that would be a good example. And that's a polarizing and controversial topic as well. So it's good when you can lean into themes like that. It gets a lot of attention if you do it the right way. So now I'm going to get kind of granular into just tactics. So when you launch, you want to launch a show with several episodes. There's a couple reasons for this. One, if you launch an episode and you're doing a bi-weekly podcast, which is fine, and someone likes it and they have to wait 2 weeks for the next episode, there's a good chance they'll forget about you in the next 2 weeks. Also, the way the algorithm's laid out, if you launch with 5 episodes opposed to 1 and someone and let's say 100 people subscribe that first day, it'll count as 500 downloads opposed to 100 downloads, which will get you up in the rankings a bit. It's key to get reviews and subscribers in those first 8 weeks. And going back to the multiple episodes, podcasting has disrupted radio similar to what Netflix did to TV. Netflix completely batches most of their TV shows, or all of them. People like binge watching. You can take that model to a podcast. If they hear something and they like it, they're going to want more. So highly recommending launching with several episodes. We can keep going. Activating PR. As a lot of you guys know, if a company launches a podcast or an individual launches a podcast, it's still noteworthy, especially in this area, since not a lot of people have gotten into the game yet. And then I'd explore securing a media partnership too, kind of like what we did with OnMilwaukee. If you guys have any trade publications or it's the Business Journal or something like that, if you're creating content and you're saying, hey, OnMilwaukee, I'll put your logo, I'll give you a shout out on all our podcasts, I just want an article on your website, and we can have a strategic partnership like that, that's increased our reach quite a bit because our content aligned and it's worked out well. Activating guests and influencers. We were lucky enough to do a Trek podcast with Brett Favre a month or 2 ago. Big guy in person. He was still looking pretty jacked. And the show took off when he shared it. And this is one of the reasons why the GoGedders took off on a smaller level, because most of the guests that you're having on the podcast are typically influential people. They have their own social media following, and even a CEO with 1,000 LinkedIn connections who typically doesn't post his own content, I've seen them post anything and people just go crazy because he has a very tight network that like hearing from them. So again, the good thing about this is Brett shared this out to his audience. Trek wants to tap into new audiences, and Trek's logo is all over it. And you probably can't read the text, but it's enjoyed talking to Trek and something else I can't read right now. And it just got a ton of hits and one kind of viral on there. Yes?
So was that a paid partnership with Brett, or how did he get involved?
No, so Trek has a relationship with him. He does the charity ride with the Mac Fund every year, so he was in Madison for the Mac Fund ride and then came on the podcast. I know they've hooked him up with bikes, and I think his boy's up with some bikes, but I don't think it was paid. And then they just did one with Bo Jackson that's coming out soon. Alex back there was there for that one, and because Trek supports Bo's ride that he does down in Alabama every year. But even on a smaller level, like I'll go back to the Black Girls Do Bike episode, and that's not Brett Favre. They have a much smaller following than Brett does on social media, but their following is very loyal and very passionate. And when she shared that content, they all liked and engaged with that content, and it got really good reach because of it. And a lot of the guests that I've had on my show in Milwaukee who have shared the content, a lot of their friends engage with it. And the good thing is, my name and my brand was all over it, similar to how now Trek's brand's getting in front of all these Brett Favre and NFL fans who are probably also active people. They're getting in front of the Black community, the Black women community, and they're tapping into these new networks by highlighting these people and creating good content for them. So you think about a lot of your companies, and could you do this with your customers? Could you do this with your potential customers? Could you do this with some of your philanthropic partners and, have your name on this content? Running a contest, so I talked about how important the launch is, and one of the things we've done well, there's an app called King Sumo that you can use for launch, and what it does is if you give something away, it incentivizes people. They get bonus entries into the contest if they leave a review, if they subscribe, if they like your Facebook page, Instagram page, subscribe to your newsletter. So this can be a pretty rapid way when you launch a podcast to build it up. And we talk about how we don't want a podcast to be just completely standalone from your other marketing. We want it to make an impact and complement all your other marketing initiatives, and tying that in hey, saying, okay, I use this podcast. Maybe it's only getting 500 downloads, but we launched it and it grew our email list by 1,000 people. That's pretty valuable to a small to mid-sized company. And again, a lot of people in these industries, you look at how much a customer is worth to you, the transaction value is really high, and if you launch a program like this and it helps you land a few customers or a few new clients, it can pay for itself pretty fast, especially in the B2B industries here. Live events and podcasts can be powerful. So this is great. I consider this a live event. Nothing beats face-to-face. If you're sitting down across with someone, nothing beats face-to-face. But face-to-face is not scalable. The internet is scalable, podcasting is scalable, social media is scalable. So a lot of companies, they have these events, and they're great for a day, and they'll spend a ton of money throwing this event, and then the content doesn't live on after it at all. So that's the reason why I have a microphone on right now and I have Taylor running around getting some video content of this, is because this is an awesome opportunity for me to be in front of all you guys, but I'm going to chop this up into 5 LinkedIn videos, and instead of 50 people seeing this, 10,000 people might see this, and I might run this as its own podcast, and then maybe we'll generate some leads off that. So I think it's just being proactive. And if you guys have companies that throw events and conferences, it can be another good opportunity. So I have the Fall Experiment logo, and as I said, I'll be interested to see what comes of this. This is the first time we've done this, but we'll be there recording the top 8 talks, and that way the festival will live on after, and they can do another push the month after the conference, and they can add to that platform throughout the year. And then attendees have something to look back on this content after they leave as well. So all in all, if you launch a podcast, your promotional funnel may look something like this, where you've got PR and influencers, guests, like a Brett Favre or Black Girls Do Bike, social media, email, web traffic, all kind of leading to a launch contest, and then the launch contest gaining you email subscribers, social media followers, podcast subscribers, and hopefully leads and customers, because that's what really matters for you guys. I'm happy to send this deck out after too, so you guys can have it then. And then I've already harped on this, but using this to create an ongoing content engine. So I just put an example, like Monday we might release our audio, Tuesday we might do social media posts, Wednesday we'll email the guests to share that content we just posted, Thursday we'll put an article up on OnMilwaukee, the following Tuesday we'll email a recap. So it's staggered out a little, so I can take that one podcast I make and just be everywhere over the course of that week with that content. I've already gone over this a lot, but podcasting is more than audio. We can run through this. And then just make sure, like any good marketing, you're experimenting, you're measuring everything, you're seeing what works, what doesn't work. We didn't have very high quality audio, worked to an extent. We knew we needed to ramp it up. We changed our game. We were doing more one-on-one interviews. Now we're more topics. So you got to keep evolving over time. You put something out there, like any business model, you see how the market responds, and then you adapt based on that. That's all I've got on that one. You can keep going. All right, so just closing out. Again, it is not too late to get in the game. 750,000 podcasts, 400 million active blogs, a lot of people listening to audio. I'd rather play in this space. Using this platform to tell amazing stories that your audience is not going to be able to get anywhere else. Using it for more than audio. And then if you guys have any questions, I'll hang around for as long as you want. But if you have any questions, just Richie, RICHIE, @ggmm.io. Feel free to email me. That's all I got. I'll take questions. Yes.
A lot of us live and play in the world of billable hours.
Yep.
So if we're doing this on behalf of a client, how many hours would you say it takes from beginning to end to produce, come up with good storylines, good guests, like beginning to end?
Per episode, I think if you're doing it on a high end, 25 to 35. And then once you get it rolling and you get in the system, then it could be 4 or 5 hours once it's actually launched, especially if the client's booking the guests and having them come in to the studio and you're recording for an hour and then you're editing the audio after you built that template and distributing it. Then it gets easier, but up front it does take some time, for sure. Yeah.
How do you go about selecting a host or working with your clients to select a host and then pass that coaching them? Is it something that they come to you and say, I want this, I'm going to be the host, or is it something that you kind of give them a vision?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. We've had a bunch of companies come to us and be like, oh, this is great. Our staff is really busy right now. We have a guy who'd be great at hosting, but I don't want to take him away from his other work. And that's almost on the company. A lot of the companies we're working with right now, they have some sort of person in them who's producing thought leader content already, or who's good. Or Colliers, for example, they have a bunch of people who do a good job, and they have rotating hosts. So they have 4 different hosts. So then, opposed to someone needing to do it weekly, it's a once every month or 2 commitment. They'll come into the office, they'll knock out a couple episodes and go from there. But yeah, it is a collaborative process. So you look at, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Gimlet Media, but they worked with companies and they actually took production completely away from that, which may be where our business model goes in the next couple of years, where we actually hire journalist type people to host shows so we can just take it completely off the client's plate. We'll see though. Any other questions?
So I work for a B2B company.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what kind of success you've seen with B2B companies that start and launch podcasts.
Yep.
And my second part of that question is, we've done a few of them, not consistently enough, really it's been more internally based. We've had different hosts
Yep.
on the shows. Is that an issue, or does it bother the listeners to whomever is hosting the show? Because we've really rotated. 10 or 12 that we've done.
I think it's a personal preference. I think if you're just putting out thought leader type content, I think it's fine to rotate. I think if someone's really good and the listeners fall in love with that person, and then the person who's stepping in as a guest host is a downgrade from that, then I think that's when it becomes a problem. But if you have good rotating hosts and sometimes they do episodes at the same time, then I think it's fine. As far as the results, we've seen, I'm a B2B company. Those are the kind of results that we've gotten. It's brought in a lot of revenue just based off the relationships that we've built, because we highlighted a lot of leaders and tapped into their networks, and it was a really good play. From that end, I see Colliers, I don't know, I haven't talked to them about monetary results they've gotten recently, but they have not a ton of downloads, but they have all the right people listening to it, and they're getting a ton of community leaders on their show, which I'm guessing, if they close one big deal from doing the podcast, it's probably going to pay for itself. That's the benefit of B2B. High transaction value, and the bar for marketing is set so low. So you can do anything and be ahead of your competitors. It's a great spot to be in. Yeah. Yeah.
What's the easiest way to find out how many downloads other people's podcasts are getting? And second, unrelated question, any particular tips on trying to get the media to cover a podcast?
Yeah. I don't know of a good way to tell other podcast downloads. It's tough right now. Podcast analytics, it's not like I can go to YouTube and see, oh, Joe Rogan got 1.1 million views on this video clip. You can see how many Facebook views they're getting and YouTube views. Podcast downloads are tough unless there's articles written on the company's podcast, and then you can do some research and dig in and find out, so we do some of that. We use a platform called Buzzsprout, where we get all of our analytics and our clients' analytics on there. And then as far as pitching the media, I think it's just reaching out and saying, hey, we're doing this podcast episode with blank and blank. I know you guys cover content like this. I think it would be a good fit. Do you want to be our exclusive media partner on this podcast? I would just ask that you write an article on the episode, and we'll give Biz Times a shout out on the podcast. that's what worked with me and OnMilwaukee, so I can talk from experience there.
So speaking of platforms, obviously there's Stitcher and iTunes, and people can even just do YouTube podcasts. Do you have any suggestions for probably this audience and kind of our targeted people to where we should go, or how's our info?
Yeah, so it's not that hard to be everywhere.
Okay.
So going back, so this platform's called Buzzsprout, and if I send you guys the deck, their logo is on the last slide, and I can't speak really technically to it. Alex might be able to answer one of those questions, but we publish an episode and then it automatically distributes to Google Play, Stitcher, Apple, Spotify, all the major platforms.
So if you're a company that's looking to advertise on a podcast, how do you go about selecting a podcast in your audience, and how do you go about knowing what the rates would be?
So you can, I might do that SurveyMonkey idea and reach out to my customers and ask what podcasts they're already listening to, because I'm guessing if there's common themes, then people who don't know about you but are in that target audience will be listening to the same podcasts. I think that's a good starting point. And then there are companies that specialize in this. I'm blanking on their names. I would just Google podcast media buying, podcast advertising buying. But you could reach out directly to the host if you want to have a better relationship. And we haven't brought on any advertisers yet. But what we would do if we brought one on, I think, would be obviously do promotion on the podcast, but a lot of it with us is the social media content, and too, that's going to get out of in front of a lot of people and probably create additional content for them that can be used, and use the guests as influencers as well, if it makes sense. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you guys so much for having me.